What was the most paranormal thing that's ever happened to you? Not safe for work, part 2. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was 13, my friend's dad came over and knocked on my door. Before I could even get to the door, he started walking away. I went outside and called out to him, but he just looked back at me and continued home. I thought it was odd, so I sent him a text. No reply, but that was normal for him. About 5 hours later, my friend came and knocked on my door. She told me that her dad had died the night before because he fell asleep at the wheel. I'll never forget that moment of confusion or shock. I had just seen him. He couldn't be dead. To this day, I'm still shocked that it happened. My great-grandmother's husband passed away years before her. Her house always felt creepy. Well, he was a trucker and would be home every weekend. And just like clockwork, every Friday at 6 p.m., you'd hear the front porch creak. Then, after about 8 seconds, you'd hear heavy boot steps on the kitchen floor. She started deteriorating on a Monday. She wanted to be home, so the hospital let her go home. There was nothing they could do. She passed at 6:05 that Friday. Her last words were to her daughter, "Don't cry. George is here to walk with me." The next Friday, there were no boot steps. The house had now fallen silent with time. After she passed, the house felt happier. Now, I'm not a very spiritual person, but I believe her husband waited for her. After my dad passed away, the following weekend we had a mass for him, then a small gathering at my house with friends and family, and later in the night, his computer turned on by itself, and no one was in the living room, so I thought that was spooky as hell. I have a tough time believing in spirits sometimes, but I'd like to have hoped it was him saying hello. I haven't told the internet this story, but here goes. I worked at a haunted Pizza Hut in Washington State in the mid-90s. I was a shift manager that liked to work when it was called a dough open shift. I'd get there early to make dough and do morning prep. Then I'd open the store. I'd be done at 2 p.m. and have the rest of the day to myself. This Pizza Hut was in a parking lot complex, stores on the periphery of a larger parking lot. My store was joined to a small teriyaki restaurant. A short walk away was a QFC where I'd go to get coffee after the dough was made, but before I began prep. Every morning I worked, I'd hear the teriyaki restaurant also doing their prep work. I'd be making dough and putting them on a tail rolling rack that went into the dough proofer. After that, the large rack would get rolled into the walk-in fridge, 10 by 10 room. Now, for those who have worked in pizza or any restaurant that rolls racks around, you'll know what I'm saying when I say there's no mistaking this sound. There isn't anything that sounds like restaurant prep and rolling racks into a walk-in. So, one day about 2 years in, I was late leaving to get coffee. It was right before we opened, so I was hustling to get to QFC. I almost run into the lady that owns the store. She's late too. Flustered, has her hands full, purse, drink, and bank bags, and can't find her keys. I tell her I heard her prep person just a few minutes ago, but I bet if she tapped on the window they'd let her in. She had her hands full, so I did the tapping. She was staring at me. I go to the window and start tapping. Lights are all off. Weird. I can see into the prep area, and it is dark back there too. She says she should call the police. I'm like, what? Why? No one preps anything in the morning, ever. They prep at close. Absolutely no one should be in the restaurant before about 15 minutes prior to open. She calls the police, and they check out the restaurant. No one there. They take my statement. The noises continued until I quit working there a year later. I asked other employees if they also heard it, and they all said yes. Even my manager heard it. Other creepy things there. The night we had a manager's meeting, 4 of us there sitting my manager's desk, and we hear a kid's footsteps running hell-bent for leather through the back of the house and past us. Didn't see anything, but the break table tablecloth waved like someone ran by it quickly. The pop machine would randomly say shit. It couldn't, it was the 90s, and it wasn't a new machine. The customer's alert bell was always going off. No one there. Doors locked. It's super creepy doing weekend inventory 2 hours after close, and the front door beeper goes off 3 times in 15 minutes. Bathroom door would lock up randomly, and you couldn't leave. When I was a little girl, I had an imaginary friend named Sally. She was blonde, had a white party dress, black shoes, and a red bow. I saw her clearly, but thought it was normal because of how imaginary friends are shown in cartoons. I eventually stopped seeing Sally and just shelved her memory to being a childhood fantasy. Then, one day a friend of mine who was sensitive asked me about the girl in the white dress and bow. I told her about my old imaginary friend. My sensitive friend said, "I see her standing in the corner staring at us. She doesn't like that I can see her." That was scary. My girlfriend and I woke up in separate parts of the house in hysterics, naked and covered in sweat. When we both finally calmed down and talked, we realized we had the same dream of being surrounded by a group of black and white people with no mouths. A little over 2 years ago, I was working at a daycare right before my college fall semester began. I had just gone on lunch and was at the very first stoplight, and I had this really bad feeling that something was going to happen. I couldn't explain it, other than it was an incredibly powerful feeling of dread. I decided to turn right. I live in the US, when I would have usually kept going to get to the next block, then turn right. This was the first time I'd ever driven on this particular street since I started working at this daycare, and a lady pulls out in front of me from a stop sign, and I had T-boned her and ended up breaking my dominant wrist that now has 6 screws and a plate, all because I had thought by turning at this light, I'd avoid the bad feeling I had. I was watching my friend's dog because she was out of town for the weekend. Of course, it's in an old, creepy house down in the woods. Anyways, I was on the couch in the living room with the dog at my side, putting him and watching some TV when I heard footsteps from the second story. Then I heard a door open. I thought someone might have broken in or something, so I went up with a knife, saw nothing but got chills, closed the door, went down and continued watching TV. After a while, I heard footsteps again, and this time I heard them distinctly going toward the stairs that lead into the living room. The dog stood up at my side and started growling towards the stairs as it began creaking, and I got an overwhelming feeling of not being wanted. So I took the dog and got the F out of there. As I walked rather hurriedly away from the house, I felt a gaze on me, turned around and saw a figure in the second story, and then the curtains got shut. I ran home, never been down there since. In most of my dreams, I'm walking around my grandma's house. The place is a maze in real life, but when I'm asleep, it's seemingly endless. When she died, I was devastated. She passed peacefully in her home, and my family kept the property. No one lives in it, but we still actively upkeep it. I was living 400 miles away when I had the dream that I was wandering around the house, as I do most nights. Only this time my grandma was calling out my name. I kept opening doors but couldn't find her. Finally, her voice got louder, and when I opened the door, it was her dressing room, only it was engulfed in smoke. Flames were pouring in through her window, and I panicked. Next thing I knew, I was sitting up in bed. I figured it was just a bad nightmare and tried to forget about it. But this one really stuck with me. 3 days later, I get a call from my mom. She told me that there had been a fire at Grandma's. The 50-plus-year-old wiring started an electrical fire, so happens outside her dressing room. Luckily, the neighbor noticed it while having the dinner and put it out. He didn't have our phone number, so he left a note on the front door. It took 3 days until my mom went over there and found it. Turns out, I had had that dream hours after it had actually happened. I don't think my grandma resides in the house, but I think she's watching out for it. I grew up in Mexico, and as a kid I lived in Guerrero, very mountainous. Sometimes the nights can get so dark you can't even see your hand if you held it up to your face. One night I left my friend's house and walked home alone. I was a fearless 10-year-old, and the walk wasn't too far. About halfway home, I heard my grandmother call out from the darkness to my right. Not super close, but not far away either. "Berenice, come here and help me." I thought it was odd my grandmother was out there, but I also didn't get scared. I told her I'm almost home, and I'll get Mom and some better lights, and we'll come help you. The voice said again, "No, please, come quickly." And it was a bit more aggressive. I walked away and got home. My mom and grandmother were waiting for me. Chills went down my spine when I saw my grandma was at home. I asked her if she was just outside, and she laughed. My mom said that they had both been there at home waiting for me. I told them the story, and for some time after that, they wouldn't let me walk alone. One of those situations where I wasn't scared at the moment and then had a frightening revelation when I got home. Growing up, I used to hear the same series of noises start at exactly the same time every night. At 11:37 p.m., I would hear footsteps on a rock landscaping outside my window. Then shortly after, I would hear a dog barking, but no neighbors had a dog. But one used to, and it died a few years before this happened. The footsteps would stop, but then it sounded like someone chopping wood or hitting a tree with a blunt object. I never got scared until one night I had a friend over to confirm I wasn't crazy and hearing things. The noises started and I usually sat quietly and listened when I was alone, due to the fact I was scared shitless as a kid, but this time my friend said really loud, "Oh my God." And at that instant, we both heard a loud bang on my window. I ran to wake my parents, who never heard any of it and didn't believe me. Years later, I moved down to our basement bedroom, never heard anything, until I had the same friend over. We were playing video games and didn't realize the time, but again, heard a loud pounding sound on my basement window, enough to wake my very hard of hearing dad. He said he checked outside right as he heard it, but didn't see anything. Then checked the window. Well, nothing. I put it in the past until my mother recently explained to me that she had been hearing things around 11:30 at night. She's the only one in the house, as my dad recently passed, and now she's actually frightened because she says it happened every night. These events used to happen in my early teens, and I'm now in my 30s, and apparently still happening. I am tempted to stay the night in my old bedroom to see if I still hear it. I've had a few things, but the most prominent thing was I was about 9 to 10 and was sitting at the bar counter of the kitchen, which faces the front door to the house. My mom and grandmother were cooking and chatting, and I was looking at them. I saw a man walk from the living room behind the kitchen, past the front door, and into the laundry room. It looked just like my dad. I was a daddy's boy, and his go-to place was the garage, which you enter from the laundry room. I was excited and confused as to seeing him because he was supposed to be out working, but I just saw him head to the garage. So I asked my mom, "Dad is home from work early?" She said no, but he would be home in a couple hours. I said, "But I just saw him walk to the garage." Confused, my mom went to go check and asked if I was playing around. I told her no, I wasn't, and I was serious. I saw a man that looked like my dad walk past the door. My mom was freaking out a bit, but she told me she thought I might have seen my dead uncle. She said he was murdered and no one found his killer, that when she had met him, he looked like my dad, bit. Here's one. I'm a talkative person, and I was at a bus stop talking to an old man. An Asian girl comes to the bus stop, wearing very unique clothing with many bright colors. I've never met her before. I think in my head, Tintin would be a good name for her. Tintin is an old adventure comic book. I start talking to her and end up asking her name, and then she says it's Tintin. I never met her before this event, so how did I guess that? Probably a tie between two stories. I woke up to a dark figure, looked like a horned demon dude at like 2 a.m., paralyzed about 7 months ago. It didn't move and soon disappeared, and I could move again. Didn't think anything about it as I was tired and figured it was a hallucination. Was about to go to sleep when both of my little sisters, 3 and 6 at the time, started screaming. I jumped up, ran to their room, and they were both in the corner crying, saying they saw a goat man. Yeah. After calming them down and taking a stroll through the house, looking for open doors, windows, or anything else odd, didn't see anything abnormal, they went back to sleep. I couldn't for a couple of hours. Woke up the next day, and apparently both my parents and brother, who lived on the other side of the house, didn't hear anything, including my sisters screaming. They assumed I made it up, and my story was the reason my sisters were spooked. 2. While I didn't see the ghost myself, I heard plenty of stories of the blonde woman in a blue dress from my mom and other people at my church with similar stories. Apparently, when there were very few people in the church, a blonde woman in a blue dress was sometimes seen walking the halls of the church, sitting in the pews. She was almost always seen facing away from people, but was undoubtedly blonde. Everyone always described her as being far away and never acknowledging the people who saw her. I think I've heard about it 6 or 7 different people from different age groups who've seen her. At first, I didn't think they were being serious, but I found the stories to be exciting. Huge mystery horror fan. In my senior year of high school, I wrote an essay on ghost sightings in my hometown. The assignment was to convince the teacher that something fake was real, so of course I had to write about ghosts. I'm researching the supposed sightings around town, the similarities in the different sightings, the whole shebang. I'm on the website, showing where all of my sightings took place, when I see one near the church where the blue dress lady was seen. My inner self had that spooked excitement feeling, and I clicked into it. There was a house about a block away from the church that was supposedly haunted. It apparently has 7 spirits. From the ones I remember off the top of my head, there was one who made the attic glow red or something like that. One was a child who liked to run up and down the stairs, and perhaps the one that freaked me out the most was the woman in a blue dress. I had chills. Telling my mom, who works as the church's secretary, who said she'd seen the woman before, really freaked her out at the time. We still joke about it today, though I still get chills every once in a while thinking about it. My grandparents had this old clock from like the 1920s that's been passed down through the years. It stops ticking when the owner of said clock dies. I thought it was a joke. Well, Grandpa passed in 2006, and I was staying with my grandma the night. He passed that morning, doing homework. At midnight, the clock chimed 12 times and then stopped ticking. I got up and looked, and it noped off the bed. I was 18 at the time. Every time I stick my foot out of my blanket, this happens. Around 3 a.m., I wake up due to the feeling of being watched. I always look at my door and it's opened. Creepiest thing though, I always feel something on my foot, like a hand or whatever. It happens so often that at this point, I don't care anymore and just go back to sleep. But the first time it happened, I was terrified. I was sleeping in one morning, and I was suddenly awakened by a man standing by the bed that I had never seen. He was wearing an old-timey yellow plaid shirt with 2 patch pockets on the front. He had really short blonde hair and brown eyes. I jumped in the bed and yelled out. My heart jumped in my chest, and he disappeared. I yelled again and cringed against the headboard, unable to take my eyes off the place where he had been. Everyone told me it was just a very vivid dream, but I think I was awake the whole time. Never saw him again. I had a nightmare that there was a black figure at the end of my bed just standing there. The figure bent over the bed and put its hand down, and then I woke up. Heart racing and sweating a bit, I looked down and there was an impression on the bed. Trying to be reasonable about it, I thought the cat must have been laying there, and my brain just filled in the rest. I stayed awake for about 5 minutes when my wife woke up, breathing really hard, and she turned to hold me. I asked her if she was good, and she said she had had a nightmare. I asked what it was about, and she said that there was a black figure at the end of the bed watching her, and that it bent over the bed and put its hand down on the cover. I sat there for about 1 full minute, attempting not to freak out. Eventually, I got up and turned on every light in the house. In college, 3 of us lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. One of the guys was a spiritual type, into weird stuff. I didn't really understand it all. He seemed like he was being bothered by something, never slept well, highly irritable. He also stopped taking showers, and his hygiene got really bad, and eventually he moved out. One night, me and the other roommates were laying on our loft beds in the 1-bedroom in the dark, talking about how our place had a weird vibe recently. The bedroom had an ensuite bathroom, and we both saw a dark shadow head peek through the doorway of the bathroom and then dip back in. I said out loud to my roommate, "Did you just see that?" And he responded, "Yes, let's not talk about it." I agreed, and we went to sleep and never spoke about it again.